Mutombo before he had the official moniker, because it wasn't just in Africa, as you know, because you travel so much with us. All around the world, he was an ambassador of the game, and that he devoted so much of his life to humanitarian efforts. I mean, he famously built a hospital in the Congo, and that was very public. But I'm looking at Kathy Behrens, who worked directly with him. There was so much he did that was completely out of the bright lights that nobody had any idea. He was a constant fundraiser. I mean, I used to sort of joke that when we traveled with him, he had his card as the NBA ambassador. This is when these days when I take out my business card, young people say, "What is that piece of paper?" But when people still had business cards, he would start with his NBA ambassador card, and then he'd wait till I walked away, and out would come 4 other cards of all these other programs that he would be raising money for. And he was so committed to it. And his spirit was infectious. I mean, I think part of it just being a 7-footer, we all knew when we traveled with him, whether it was to, Mumbai, a place where people might not know much about basketball, or Dikembe Mutombo, I think because of his size, because of his laugh, just because of his presence, they instantly would know he was somebody important, and he'd create those connections. I mean, something we all
So
talk
this is
about
supposed to be
these
Adam
days.
Silver's
So
closing statements. If you're
I
just
know
now
David
tuning
loved him.
in,
I loved him. We miss him tremendously. We think a lot about his wife Rose and his children, and this award was the least we can do. You mentioned the courts as well, and of course Dikembe was number 55. So we've already working with our partners in Africa have built many courts, but we announced we were going to do an additional 55 courts with special branding on them associated directly with Dikembe Mutombo. So thank you for that question.
4th row in the center, Vinny.
that's what's
Hey,
up.
I'm Vince Goodwill, Yahoo
Hey,
Sports.
Shout out.
Good to see you. In contrast to the Luka Doncic trade, there was the Jimmy Butler long drawn
I
out.
thought that was the trade before when here in
You
Golden
thought
State.
that was the
Yeah,
trade.
yeah,
Okay. Secondary trade. It was long, drawn out, suspensions, mudslinging on both sides. All of these trades seem to have the constant theme of longer money, second aprons. Are you concerned that the new CBA is going to create more contentious player
That boy
franchise
trying to ask that
standoffs like
question
we've
from
had?
them boys.
No, I'm not concerned that that will be the result of the new CBA. I actually think that what the CBA was designed to do, honestly, is to force teams to make difficult decisions. I think teams are still finding their way a bit through this new second apron and what it means. But for us, like, it's no secret that part of the design of that CBA and pushing down high-end spending was to create more parity in the league and to do a better job distributing our best players around the 30 teams. And I think you're seeing that to a certain extent already. I'll note, I mean, and I think new CBAs are always difficult to predict. I think it was only a few months ago when the conventional wisdom around the league seemed to be that we sort of spoiled the excitement around the trade deadline, that the day and
Go ahead
age
and
of
drop
these
a like
great
on the
trades
video
right
for
at the
me, y'all.
deadline weren't going to happen anymore. I think that we then just
Share the
saw
link.
more players moved before the trade deadline than any time in the history of the league. So I don't look. I think there's two sides to every trade, and for the best aspect of trades is that it potentially creates a sense of renewal in some markets, sense of excitement in others. There, of course, is a downside from a player standpoint. Putting aside a contentious situation, park that for a second. I mean, I know, because I talk directly to players, as do you, it's incredibly disruptive in a player's life to get traded, and many players are of the age where they have young children, and kids potentially get dislocated, mid-year from school. I think it's part of the grand bargain of playing in the NBA in return for guaranteed contracts and strong, union representation, and a lot of money, honestly. So it's all in the back and forth sort of that is part of playing professional sports. Certainly, that's not unique to the NBA. So I don't think it's bad. I mean, we always looking at our CBAs. It's like I talked about before with the game. I mean, will there be opportunities to improve it? Presumably, yes. And I feel like as through successive collective bargaining agreements, we've always found ways to tweak things and make things a little better in certain cases. But I look now, most importantly, at the level of parity we have in the league. Of course, 6 different champions over the last 6 years. But just look at the season so far, where where you have Oklahoma City and Cleveland with top records going into All-Star. I mean, that's without anybody. The great news is I don't hear many people saying, and by the way, there's smaller markets. That the goal is that no longer becomes part of the discussion, that you have a 30-team league and teams are judged based on quality of management, desirability for players. Luck will play into that as it always does, but that's what we're trying to create here at the league office.
Standing on the right, Tim.
Now that we've, okay. Now that Alex Rodriguez and Mark Laurie have won the arbitration case earlier this week, do you expect the Board of Governors to ratify them as the new owners of the Wolves?
I'm not gonna lie, he looks so different compared to that square box angle that we always see him in, compared to this more wider angle.
My expectation is that will move forward, but first, Glenn Taylor does have a decision to make as to whether to appeal that arbitration decision. I mean, that's Glenn's decision to make. I haven't talked to him directly about that. I think, though, that A-Rod, certainly Mark Laurie, are well known to the league at this point. They've already been vetted and approved as minority owners. I think they understood that the league had no role in this arbitration. That was something they had agreed to as part of their purchase agreement. And I think now that the arbitration has been resolved, I think they will, as I said, Glenn Taylor has a decision to make. If he chooses to appeal it, obviously we will wait till that there's finality as that process. And if he doesn't, we will move forward right away and continuing the remaining part of our vetting process. And then it would go to the governors for a vote.
If he doesn't appeal, though, would you expect them to be ratified after this vote?
The only reason I'm not going to answer that is that I don't want to turn the Board of Governors' role into a rubber stamp. I mean, that is a decision they need to make. We should conclude the vetting process. I know Mark and Alex understand that. That's a process that every governor in this league has gone through. I will say, standing here today, I don't see any reason why it won't be approved. But again, we need to follow the process.
On the right front row, Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Nichols, Fox
Hi,
Sports.
Rachel.
A bunch of your all-stars today were asked if they had your job as NBA commissioner, what they would do. And given any topic in the entire league being open to them, the topic that most of the guys hit on.
These people look so different. I guess it's because they're not fresh out of the makeup room, but it's crazy. Your boy looked like what your boy looked like, man.
Was officiating. And Steph Curry, Anthony Edwards, Damian Lillard, Cade Cunningham, a handful of other guys talked about different aspects of that. Steph Curry was talking about transparency. I know you guys already do the last 2-minute report, but he would like to see the official grades and the way that system works for each official. Damian Lillard Ant Edwards was talking about text and how he'd like the standard for that to change. And they had different aspects to it. But I guess what I wanted to know from you is, how much do you want or need to be responsive when some of your top players are talking about this kind of thing? And again, given any topic out there, this is what they kept talking about today.
I remember David Stern used to say, when he was asked about officiating when he was commissioner, he said 100 years from now, whatever changes, that somebody's going to be standing here and they're going to ask them about officiating and be unhappy with it. So that issue obviously isn't going to go away. I just will say that we welcome direct feedback from all players in the league, whether they're top players or not. And I think it is an ongoing discussion. And we're always looking to improve officiating. NBA players are members of our competition committee, so we talk directly about it there. And we have our own conversations with Andre Iguodala and the Players Association about how we potentially can improve officiating. A couple other points. I mean, one is I'm very hopeful that there will be some technological solves when it comes to officiating. I think we've talked about this before. People are familiar with Hawkeye.
I need y'all to sound off in the chat. Are you happy with the officiating that you have seen thus far from the league? Or do you feel there's room for improvement? Drop it in the comments. I'm talking to you.
Technology owned by Sony. It's used in tennis. We've been working with them for the last few years about creating the objective ability for example, out of bounds calls. You know, as I said before, there's 100 fingers on the floor at any point, different body parts. So it's not as technically straightforward or easy as I might have thought it would have been as a non-technologist. So, but they're working hard on that, foot on the line, etc. Goaltending, other calls like that, anything that we can be objectively decided. I think to the extent that we can do that, and we'll get that done in the next couple of years, it will then allow the officials to be more focused on the truly subjective calls, block charge, etc. Is there a foul? You know, the sufficiency of the contact. So we're working on that. What's hard is on some of these calls, you said Anthony Edwards mentioned technicals. It's very hard to have bright lines on some of those things. There's a little bit of, you know it when you see it. I know that's not always satisfying to our players, but we work directly with them. We look at a lot of tape with them. We're players and teams on occasion will come into the league office and say, we want to talk about the way a particular player is being officiated, and maybe there's something that the officials are missing. And just lastly, to your point about transparency, I think that's one that the officials also have their own union. Everyone in this room is familiar with human resources issues, you know, and that nobody necessarily wants to have their employment record published. And I think we just have to find the right balance there.
My only follow-up to you is no one ever asked you if you were a player for the day, what would you do?
I would stop complaining about officiating.
We're going to move to the left side, second row, Ann.
But thank you for asking me.
Ann Killian with the San Francisco Chronicle. A lot of people tuning in tonight were probably hoping that they would see a sequel to what a lot of people considered the highlight of last year's All-Star game, the Sabrina and Steph shootout. Can you shed a little more light on why, after a lot of anticipation and ideas being floated of what was going to happen, the league could not make that come about? And also, what's your level of disappointment that something that groundbreaking and that cool wasn't able to be recreated?
The issue there, and it goes precisely to the last point in your question, and I did speak directly to Steph and Sabrina about it. Last year was so magical, that competition, that it started to feel forced. And I think there was concern from all of us that we just weren't feeling it, that we were at the point where it felt like we were, even though I had been public, I had said that I was very hopeful or said it was going to happen again. And I think so had they, that it just got to the point where I don't know how to say it other than we just weren't collectively feeling it. That just that it was such a unique moment last year. I think it wasn't that people were anticipating it was, and they both shot the lights out in that moment.
Yeah, no,
It
we
just
gotta
seemed like
set the
coming back
stage for
here,
this, boy.
as
Look like he
exciting
about
as
to
it
do
might
some
have been,
splaining.
that this just wasn't the right time to do it. And there's no more to it than that. I mean, they're both friends, they're wonderful people. I'm sure there's a part of them that recognizes they may be disappointing people, but I think they all felt, and they felt, and I agreed with them, that if it just didn't feel right in the moment. And so you know, we looked at different permutations and ways to do it. And as I said, and I'll be the first one to say at the end, it just felt forced. It lost that special feeling that it had last year.
We're going to go right here in the front row. Right, Mark?
Adam, Dan Wakey with the Los Angeles Times. A third question about the trade. This one, Charlotte and the Lakers had a trade for Mark Williams that was rescinded. Has Charlotte filed any formal protests in regards to this trade? And then I guess moving forwards in a world where sports science and predictive medicine takes on a bigger role in organizations, what options are there when something like this occurs?
The answer to your first question is no. Charlotte has not filed a protest of any kind. I think that the larger issue, reflecting your question in this day and age of sports science, is there a different standard of sort we should be applying in terms of players, you know, passing physicals in trades? And it's something we should look at as a league. I will say this issue does not come up that often. I can't even remember, and certainly I don't think in my tenure a trade there's ever been a challenge because a player has failed a physical, but almost by definition, you get into a certain
You're
level
fired.
of subjectivity, and where that standard is. But I think, let's see what Charlotte decides to do here. But I think either way, it's gotten our attention. Um, we understand that in the back and forth of teams and trades, that to the extent we can reduce uncertainty, that's a positive thing. And obviously, I mentioned before that for players who are involved in trades, how disruptive it can be. I'm sure it's equally as disruptive to think you had been traded than not to be just not to have been traded. Disruptive for the player, disruptive for their teammates. So, we'll look at it. I mean, I'd say that's one of those areas when it comes to, the health and well-being of our players, medical science. There have been incredible developments, and this is a rule sort of as interpreted now, hasn't changed for many decades at the league office.
And that was our last question. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Maureen.
Just a reminder, the transcripts will be available on Media Central. And have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
Hey, my boy, you ain't lying. Hey, shout out. I see you.
Sorry, I spaced out.
I see you. I see you. Shout out. Yeah, the Mavericks front office, and in particular, Mr. Dumont. Yeah, they're not really in the game of basketball. They're just around the money that it makes. So therefore, they're not making the best decisions for the team and the fans of the team. As a matter of fact, if you got a team that's other than the Mavericks, drop it in the chat, and then I'll do videos on them, trying to make sure the community gets fed. But outside of that, I'll probably go back live when the game starts or when they give me something else to come pop back on here for y'all. Hey, God, that's for my people in the back. They be out here peeping. But I'll catch up with y'all in a little bit. Holla.